walk into the cinema and take a watch of this movie. The war to resist U.S. aggression and aid Korea actually started from the Yalu Bridge, and this has already become one of the revolutionary sites for tourism. And today we have Ms. Xun with us here today. So Ms. Xun, tell us more about Jian as a city. So Jian is a city with a traditional with a tradition of supporting the Chinese Revolution, and during the Korean War, as a total of 700 CPVs registered in Jian for the Korean War, and we have among them 247 who sacrificed their lives in North Korea. So behind us is the Yalu River Bridge, and tell us more about it. So the bridge has a total length of 592 meters. The borderline is actually right in the center of the bridge. It was actually built by Japan. In 1937, this bridge was built by Japanese invaders. On September 1st, 1937, it was officially put into operation. And after the bridge was operational, Chinese wood, coal, and other raw materials were transported to the Korean Peninsula and then further transported to Japan through maritime transportations. So you talked about this bridge, and you mentioned that the central axis is actually the borderline. So what is this castle for? So this bridge castle is one major component of the bridge. And during the Japanese aggression, there were a couple of brigades stationed here, and there were a couple of soldiers living here at the time and there were soldiers deployed at the top floor just for observatory purposes. And here you can still see some marks, and those are actually written by CPVs. And now let's take a read. So this is my home. This is part of my home. I love my home, and I will defend it at whatever cost. So we are wearing much clothing today, and we don't feel cold right now. But 7 decades ago, it's very hard to imagine how those CPVs fought the war without much to wear. So if you watch the movie Crossing the Yalu River, you will gain a better understanding about this part of history. So Ms. Sun, so this bridge was the route that the CPVs passed 7 decades ago? Yes, indeed. After the war broke out, the CPVs, they entered the Korean Peninsula by Jian, and I'm actually talking about more than 420,000 CPVs. And this part of the troops, they entered into Korean Peninsula over the bridge, by the bridge. But there are also CPVs who entered the peninsula on water and also on floating bridges on the water. So the head of the 42nd Army, Wu Ruilin, built a temporary floating bridge on the river. So the 42nd Army was deployed here. Wu Ruilin, the head of the army, he went to the Korean Peninsula by train prior to the Korean War, and he actually saw a lot of people falling into water and crossing the river. And then he came up with the idea that they can quickly build a floating bridge on the water, which is not too difficult. So he established a bridge that is 375 meters long, and you can even drive vehicles across the river. And then upon the day when the order came from higher ranks of military, Xiao Jianfei took the brigade of 307 and across the river. So that is why people call Jian as the first stop of the Korean Peninsula, first stop of the Korean War. So this reflects the wisdom of the Chinese people. So we can very quickly cross the river without being noticed by those bombers flying in the air. So because the floating bridge is built temporarily and it's only 5 meters above the waterbed. So 7 decades ago, the city of Jian was spelled differently. 7 decades ago, it received an order from the superior level of government that they need to quickly build a bridge to support the transportation of the troops. So then we divided our workforce into 2 teams. One of the teams was working on the building of the bridge itself, and the other team was responsible for collecting materials. And they basically went to all the households of the people, collecting wood and also steel. So it's a very rough and simple bridge and built very quickly. And during the war's time, a total of 16 such bridges was built. So these 16 bridges, and they were a great support for the transportation of the supplies during wartime. Well, talking about this, I can't help but thinking of my grandfather, who was a veteran on the Korean War Peninsula, and I was told by him that it was quite difficult at the time because we were not controlling the air, we were not having a lot of supplies, so most of the times we were fighting at night. So that is why there is no danger above the head, because the bombers and those fighter jets, they cannot identify you in the darkness. So your grandfather, what was he doing during the Korean War period? So he was a reconnaissance soldier. So he penetrated deep into the enemy field. So what I'm very impressed is that my grandfather came originally from Hunan province, but he liked to eat potato. When I was in high school, my grandfather still cooked this potato dish for me. So he fell in love with this potato dish when he was fighting a war here in Korean Peninsula. So today we are talking about this in a very gentle tone, talking about this in a very calm tone, how those veteran soldiers like to eat potato. But we have to admit that during the war's time, even potato was a hard one. Yes, indeed, a lot of those local residents, and they were also supporting the war, despite the very difficult conditions. When I was a little kid, my grandfather told me that a lot of the kids in Jilin province, they just crossed the Yalu River and they took to the battleground and supported the war. And this is truly the story. My grandfather was a civilian soldier or a reserve soldier. When I was 8-9 years old, my grandfather, I think he was already at his 80s or 90s. And 1 year around the Spring Festival, we paid a visit to grandfather. My father asked my grandmother and my grandfather, "Do you know your grandson?" And my grandfather said, "Yes." But after a long moment of silence, so he was not quite clear-headed. By the time, he was a little bit senile, and my father asked my grandfather, "Do you still remember your surname?" And then my grandfather said, "Well, I can carry the surname of each and every people out there." And then I asked my grandfather why you give such an answer, and he said that was the practice during wartime because when you are captured by the enemy, you cannot tell your surname. You just tell them that your surname X. So this way you won't expose your true identity. And during this program, we have also reached several veterans and we had the interview with them. And now we're going to play the footage of the interview. It was truly challenging to cross the Yalu River. A lot of the soldiers died immediately after crossing the river. And you have to fight back, because if you don't, they will fight you anyway. A lot of the fellow soldiers, they died on the battleground. It was too difficult, and it's such a blessing to see many have survived and come back safely. In November 1950, I was 16 years old. I was at the time a sixth grader in primary school. I was given a military uniform and I quickly went to the battleground. And my mother was quite worried. And she said, "How come my son is not coming back?" She was told by the neighbors that I went to the battleground. And then my mother shed into tears. And I remember along the road that lead to the Korean Peninsula, there were 2 kilometers of cottages lined up together. And all the cottages, all the houses were bombarded. Nothing left. And my mother went to my grandfather and cried in front of him. My grandfather told her, "It's useless to cry. It's a war that we have to fight. It's what we have to do. If you compare to the lives that we are leading today, you cannot imagine what poor life that we have endured in the past. So without the Communist Party of China, there could never be such good life and good conditions." I also went to the battleground. While making a decision, I knew I might die. I was a nurse on a battlefield. We had too many injuries, too many soldiers transported to our center with very severe wounds, but there's no way that we could cure them. And they were just crying. A lot of them are just kids. So when the bombers were bombarding the villagers just ran around into all directions. And I just put on my helmet, and suddenly I became very brave. I no longer worry. We're at war, we just fight. And there's no fear. So right now you can eat whatever you want and however much you want. There is sufficient supply, no matter what comes into your mind. But during the wartime, there wasn't anything to eat. I lost my gun. When the second battle broke out, I just found cover behind a truck. It was truly very difficult. It was freezing cold. But look at today's life. There is no war. Everybody's at peace with one another. Everybody's enjoying their life. Everybody is living in a comfortable environment, in fancy buildings. It wasn't possible back in the years when we went to the battleground. We didn't even have food. A lot of soldiers died. Some of us have guns, but we quickly ran out of bullets. I was a communications soldier on a battleground. And we built a tent. So you talked about the battle that lasted for 7 days. And did you sleep during those 7 days? Well, you can only close your eyes and then take a good nap. I don't even know if I slept. I may have slept a few hours. That's all I remember. The first day we went to the battleground. We went straight for 3 days without food, but I didn't feel hungry. And your throat is burning, and it's truly an unforgettable experience. But right now, look at our life. We are truly enjoying our life today. And the CPVs listen to the party. All the soldiers are obedient to the party. And we were guarding a camp. So when you're guarding the camp at night, it was total dark. Were you scared? No, I wasn't scared. Because I was carrying a gun, there wasn't any fear. There's no hardship that people cannot endure. In high spirit, we crossed the Yalu River and we went there to protect our home. We are the good sons and daughters of our motherland. We were firmly united together under the party against foreign invaders. So just now, from the footage of the interview, we saw those veteran soldiers who went to the battleground 7 decades ago. So in addition to this Yalu River bridge, are there any portals? What kind of functions that did this bridge played during the war's time. So after the war broke out, in addition to transporting soldiers and military supplies, in Jian City, we organized a voluntary team that went to the battleground carrying stretchers. So we have Qu Hongyi, who was the head of the stretchers team. At the time, he was 57 years old already. He registered his name twice, but he was not approved. Why? Because he was already too old for the war. And then the third time he sent up his name, he shaved his beard, and then he was finally approved by the Jian city government, who was then appointed as the head of the number 3 team. So when he was curing the soldiers, when he was climbing downward a mountain, he encountered a couple of soldiers from North Korea, but he could understand the Korean language, and by overhearing their conversation, he knew that they were PWDs. They were POWs that have been surrendered to the enemy army, and then he just used a wooden stick and pointed at those several soldiers, and he said that if you surrender your guns, then I will not kill you. And then they just surrendered their guns, and then they were captured. So that is why they have the saying that the night of the North Korea is the moon for CPVs. Well, because the CPVs at the time, we were not afraid of darkness. So he was a legend, and in 1957, his story was published on the PLA newspaper, because he himself captured dozens of POWs surrendered to the enemy army. So he helped the CPV and fought with the CPV side by side. So at the time in Jian, we have chefs, we have drivers, we have stretcher carriers that went voluntarily to the battleground. And also, we have a lot of women in Jian that have sent up their names for nurses and doctors in the battleground. And during the war's time, there were a lot of orphans and women, war refugees. They were transported from North Korea to Jian, so we provided them with a lot of life support. So this bridge, has it been maintained even after the war, and during the war, was it bombarded? So the border bridge was severely damaged. In 1957, the southern part of the bridge was bombarded by bombers of the U.S. And then the Jian County quickly mobilized the ordinary citizens and also party members to quickly repair the bridge. And then in March 1951, it was bombarded again, and then we mobilized 30,000 people to quickly repair the bridge. So from this, I can tell that Jian is not just a border city, it's a city of heroes. With respect to the maintenance of the bridge, we had an interview. We have with us another guest who have better knowledge about this bridge. So let me ask you, what is your job responsibility on a daily basis? So we are the patrol pavilion, and we basically conduct regular inspections over the goods transported from the bridge. So this bridge carries a lot of legendary story. How has this story affected your work? So our border office was originally a unit of the military. So we were originally the military. And we have never forgot our original aspiration. 7 decades ago, our fellow soldiers sacrificed their lives simply to protect this bridge. And now we have taken over the responsibility, and we will never forget the mission that is on our shoulder. Well, from this, I can tell that you are in high spirits, and thank you very much for your interview. And now you are excused. Thank you very much. So we were just talking about how the ordinary people were supporting the CPV in their war against against American aggression, and you were just saying that during the war's time, and this is a logistic line that is very important, transporting soldiers and supplies to the battleground. So this is a steel bridge. It's for railway, and as you have mentioned that it has been damaged quite a number of times during wartime, but the GN government quickly mobilized the locals to immediately repair this bridge so as to guarantee the smooth logistics on this bridge. So this is a very important piece of relics. And now we're going to play a footage about the heroic memory of GN. GN is a city with a profound revolutionary tradition. It is the place for the Yalu Steel Bridge, which was the route towards the Korean Peninsula. In 1951, for the Korean War, 7 decades ago, tens of thousands of CPVs crossed this river and entered the Korean Peninsula. And also a total of 173,000 carriers of stretchers took the bridge and entered the Korean Peninsula. And eventually, the Chinese side claimed and won the victory of this war. The locals in Jian City, they were quickly mobilized and they built floating bridges on the water. A huge quantity of military equipment and supplies were transported to the Korean Peninsula. A total of more than 180,000 wounded soldiers were transported back from here to the hinterland of the China for better treatment. Now the bridge has become one key destination for revolutionary-themed tourism. In addition to the bridge, we have a lot of other relics, but the most representative is the Yulin village, and also the fighting scene at another village, and also the Nianpan meeting in a nearby village. Passing down this revolutionary spirit is the responsibility of Jian as a city, and Jian welcomes you at any time. So, Ms. Yun, we have seen a lot of memories related to revolution. So, what have we done in developing the red tourism in Jian? So the Jian city government attaches great importance to developing red tourism, but we try to strike a balance between preservation and development. For example, the Yalu River steel bridge is a key component of our tourism resources, and we are preserving its original looks. So here at this scenic spot, we are highlighting the spirit of the Korean War, and we have a lot of relic sites. So apart from this steel bridge, we have another bridge, which is on the other side of the river. So tell us more about the road bridge. So the road bridge was established in September 1951, and it was established by the North Korean government. So these two bridges and they are the key components of our tourism resources. If you travel to Xi'an, you will gain a better understanding about the war against U.S. aggression and aid Korea. If you take a look at the road bridge, and you are seeing the new chapter of history, and as the bridge was built by the North Korea very recently, and China has traveled a journey of very rapid industrial development. So again, we are at a heroic city with a profound revolutionary tradition. I would like to remind and tell our viewers that the China Media Group has produced a movie entitled Crossing the Yalu River, and today is its debut day. And I sincerely hope that you can all take to the cinema and watch this movie, and you will have your memories of the war refreshed. You can bring your parents and grandparents, and if you have within your family a veteran soldier from the war 7 decades ago, you can bring him or her there to refresh the memory of the war. All right, this is all to today's program. Thank you for watching.